The news of Lee Joo-Sil's death on February 2, 2025, fell like a soft winter rain over South Korea. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it carried the kind of stillness that follows something deeply personal. Those who knew her well said she would have wanted it that way, quiet, humble, and free of spectacle. At 81, the actress who had touched generations with her grace, her poise, and her subtle strength, took her final bow at her home in Uijeongbu. Her passing came only 3 months after she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. The disease moved fast, but Lee Joo-Sil had faced pain before. Even in her final days, she remained gentle and composed. Her agency shared that she had suffered cardiac arrest and was rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, where she was later pronounced dead. The news spread quickly, but what lingered wasn't the tragedy, it was the tenderness of memory. Friends and colleagues described her as a woman who never stopped giving. Despite her illness, she continued to reach out to her students, her co-actors, and her small circle of family. To her, life was not about how long one lived, but how sincerely one gave. She once told a friend that art was her only medicine, and that if she could still act, she would keep breathing. Born in 1944 in Busan during Korea's hardest years, Lee Joo-Sil grew up surrounded by scarcity but filled with imagination. As a child, she would sneak out to watch traveling performers who brought color to the dull streets. She copied their movements and whispered lines into the mirror, long before she ever stood on a stage. Her parents didn't understand her fascination with theater. Acting, to them, wasn't a respectable path. But she followed her instincts. In 1965, she made her debut in theater, stepping into the spotlight for the first time with nothing but passion and courage. That single act of defiance began a journey that would span 6 decades. She conquered the stage through sheer authenticity, becoming a beloved figure in productions throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Her eyes could express sorrow deeper than any line, and her silences were often more eloquent than words. Critics began to describe her as an actress who could move hearts without speaking. She became a quiet revolution, proof that gentleness could be powerful. As cinema grew in Korea, Lee transitioned from stage to screen. Unlike most performers who sought fame, she approached film with humility. She never demanded the spotlight, but it always found her. In 2016, she appeared in the global hit Train to Busan, playing the elderly mother of the protagonist Suk-woo. It was a small role, yet one of those unforgettable screen moments that stay long after the credits roll. Her brief appearance carried warmth and weight. Her gaze alone could make audiences tear up. Gong-yoo, the film's lead actor, later said that working with her was like learning a new language of emotion. Quiet, unspoken, but deeply human. Years later, she returned to international attention with Squid Game Season 2, portraying Park Mal-soon, the mother of Detective Hwang Jun-ho. She was already in her 80s, yet she filmed her scenes with a vitality that astonished the crew. Those who worked on set said that even when she was in pain, she refused to show weakness. Between takes, she would sit silently, her hands folded, humming softly to herself. When the cameras rolled, her expression changed instantly, filling the screen with sincerity and soul. Behind her career, however, was a story of constant endurance. Long before her final illness, Lee Joo-Sil had fought and survived stage 3 breast cancer in the 1990s. Doctors told her she might not live beyond a year, but she refused to believe that her story was finished. She endured treatment, went back to work, and found new meaning in every performance. When asked years later how she overcame it, she said simply, "I wasn't ready to leave the stage." Her love for learning was as fierce as her love for acting. In 2010, she earned a doctorate in public health from Wonkwang University, focusing on how the performing arts can heal emotional wounds. She often spoke about acting not as performance but as a form of therapy, a way of mending the invisible parts of the human spirit. Her students adored her for her honesty. She would tell them that fame was a passing illusion but truth in acting was eternal. Many of those she mentored went on to become respected figures in theater and film, each carrying a piece of her wisdom with them. Her life was not one of luxury but of quiet purpose. She lived modestly, in a small home filled with plants, books, and black-and-white photographs from her early theater days. She loved classical music, morning walks, and sharing barley tea with her neighbors. There were no signs of stardom in her living space, only the warmth of someone who had found peace within simplicity. Even as she grew weaker from her illness, she kept her daily routines. She would water her plants, write in her notebook, and send letters to her friends, wishing them well. When the diagnosis of stomach cancer came in late 2024, Joo-Sil faced it as she had faced everything else, with quiet acceptance. Those around her say she smiled and said, "I have already lived beautifully." She continued filming until she physically couldn't, wanting to complete her scenes for Squid Game 2. To her, every role was a final conversation with life, a chance to say what words couldn't express. On the morning of February 2nd, her heart gave out. She was at home, surrounded by family. The ambulance arrived, but she was already at peace. In her room, beside her bed, her family found a small sticky note on the wall. It read, "What remains after the applause fades is who you really were." Those were words she had repeated to her students many times, but now they felt like a farewell. Her funeral was held quietly, attended only by relatives, close friends, and a few colleagues. There were no camera flashes, no journalists, just tears and soft hymns. Her ashes were placed in Busan, where her journey began. The same soil that witnessed her childhood dreams now holds her eternal rest. After the ceremony, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Lee Young-jae, one of the stars of Squid Game, wrote, "She taught us that acting isn't pretending, it's remembering." Trained to Busan director Yun Sang-ho said, "Every time she entered a scene, everything slowed down. She reminded us to breathe." And one of her former students wrote online, "Professor Lee told me not to chase applause. She said, 'When they stop clapping, will you still love what you do?' That question changed my life." Stories of her kindness surfaced everywhere. Crew members recalled how she would bring homemade food to long shoots, offering warmth to those who worked behind the camera. She once paid the tuition of 2 struggling theater students, asking the university not to reveal her name. Years later, those students discovered the truth only through financial records. She never mentioned it, because for her, kindness was something that should be felt, not displayed. As fans await the release of Squid Game Season 2, her final appearance carries new meaning. In one of her last scenes, she reportedly whispered a line that now sounds like a goodbye, soft, emotional, and utterly real. The director shared that she requested one more take, saying she wanted to leave her best frame behind. That frame will now live forever, her final gift to the world. To those who knew her, Joo-Sil was not just an actress, she was a guardian of truth in art. Her legacy stretches far beyond her roles. She embodied a kind of endurance that went beyond fame, beyond age, and even beyond death. She showed that artistry is not about the spotlight, but about authenticity, about being fully human even when pretending to be someone else. In interviews, she often spoke of life in metaphors. She said acting was like walking barefoot on a cold stage, uncomfortable, honest, and real. She believed that every performance should come from a place of compassion. To her, the stage was sacred, not because it made her famous, but because it allowed her to understand humanity a little better each time. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained luminous. Friends said she laughed often in her final weeks, sometimes at small things, a bird outside her window, an old playbill she found in a drawer, the sound of rain tapping on the glass. She seemed to know she was nearing her curtain call, and she embraced it with serenity. When asked once what happiness meant to her, she replied after a long silence, "Happiness is walking home after a long day of filming, taking off your shoes, and knowing you told the truth." That single sentence captures everything she stood for: simplicity, honesty, and peace. Now, as fans across the world prepare to see her last work, there's a bittersweet comfort in knowing that Joo-Sil's spirit still lingers in every frame. When her face appears on the screen, when her eyes glisten with unspoken emotion, it will feel as if she never left. Through her performances, she continues to speak to us, gently, truthfully, eternally. Her story is no longer just hers. It belongs to everyone who has ever found strength in quietness, who has fought invisible battles, who has lived with grace despite pain. She reminds us that even after the final bow, art does not end. It breathes on in memory, in feeling, in love. Joo-Sil's journey from a small-town dreamer to a global symbol of Korean acting will forever be a part of cinematic history. She was a teacher, a survivor, and above all, an artist who turned silence into meaning. Her life was proof that greatness doesn't need to shout, it only needs to live truthfully. So when the lights fade and the credits roll, and her gentle face flickers across the screen one last time, remember the woman who gave everything to her craft. Remember her courage, her humility, and her grace. And as the applause fades into the dark, let the quiet whisper of her spirit remind us that some performances never end. Rest in power, Lee Joo-Sil, the actress who taught the world how to listen to silence. If this story touched your heart, don't let her legacy fade. Subscribe to Midnight in Seoul, where we honor the lives, love, and light of Korea's most unforgettable stars. The days following Lee Joo-Sil's passing were heavy with a quiet grief that words couldn't capture. In the streets of Seoul, fans placed white chrysanthemums outside theaters, film studios, and the old stage doors where she once performed. Some left handwritten notes, others simply bowed their heads in silence. It was as if the country itself was mourning a mother it didn't realize it had lost until she was gone. Her name began trending across platforms not because of scandal or controversy, but because of gratitude. People shared their favorite scenes, moments, and quotes, speaking of her as though she were family. Clips of her gentle smile from Train to Busan resurfaced, paired with the tender background music that made millions weep years ago. Others posted photos of her on set, her face wrinkled with age, her eyes still glowing with purpose. Each post was a digital prayer, a collective thank you whispered through screens. What made Lee Joo-Sil's passing feel so deeply personal wasn't just her fame, it was her humanity. She represented something quietly profound in the world of Korean entertainment. She was not the loudest voice or the brightest light, but she was the steady flame that refused to flicker even in the strongest wind. She reminded people that art doesn't need noise to matter, it just needs truth. In her last interview, conducted only weeks before her diagnosis, she said something that has since been shared thousands of times. She was asked what she would want people to remember her for. Her answer was soft but unwavering, that I loved stories more than I loved attention. Those words now feel almost prophetic, a message not only to fans but to the generation of actors who looked up to her. For many of her colleagues, her passing wasn't just the loss of an actress, it was the end of an era, a time when acting was rooted in sincerity, when performers worked not for fame but for meaning. Her co-star from Squid Game 2 said she never treated the younger cast as juniors. Instead, she would talk to them as equals, sharing quiet advice between takes. Once, when a young actress broke down crying during a difficult emotional scene, Lee Joo-Sil simply held her hand and said, "Don't perform pain, remember it." That moment stayed with her forever. Her home, now filled with flowers and letters from admirers, has become a small shrine of remembrance. Her favorite chair by the window remains untouched. The notebook she always wrote in sits open on the table, its last entry dated January 28, 2025, just days before her passing. The page reads, "I am tired, but my soul feels light. I hope my last role brings warmth to someone who needs it." Those words, like everything about her, carried both sorrow and serenity. She faced her mortality not with fear, but with grace. Her life had been one long performance of endurance, surviving illness, loss, and loneliness, yet she never let bitterness touch her art. Even when her health failed her body, her eyes never stopped shining. And that is perhaps the truest mark of a legend, not the awards or applause, but the way they leave behind light in a darkened room. Today, fans around the world await Squid Game 2 not just for its story, but to witness her final performance, her last dialogue with life. Some say it will feel like she's saying goodbye. Others believe it will feel like she's still here, gently reminding us to live fully. In every frame she appears in, her spirit lingers, kind, strong, eternal. Her passing has sparked reflection across the Korean entertainment industry. Many have begun revisiting the work of veteran artists, honoring those who built the foundation for modern Korean cinema. In a world that often celebrates youth and novelty, Lee Joo-Sil's story reminds everyone that artistry only deepens with age. She didn't fade away quietly, she transcended. People who once saw her only on screen are now discovering her depth off-screen, her doctoral research, her theater work, her mentorship, her generosity. Each layer of her life feels like another performance, subtle, profound, and beautiful. She taught that acting is not about being seen, but about seeing. In death, she has become more than a performer. She is now a symbol of persistence, of living truthfully until your final breath. Some nights, fans gather outside theaters where her old plays were performed, lighting candles and playing recordings of her early performances. They speak about her in the present tense, not as someone who has gone, but as someone who remains. "She's still here," one fan said, her voice trembling. "You can feel her in the silence." And that may be the most poetic truth of all. Lee Joo-Sil's entire life was a dialogue with silence. She gave emotion to quietness, and through that, she taught the world how to listen. Her story does not end with her death. It lives on in every actor she inspired, every student she taught, every person who found courage through her calm. It lives on in the way she looked at the camera, unflinching, truthful, full of life. When you watch her on screen now, knowing she's gone, it hurts, but it also heals. It reminds us that some goodbyes aren't endings, they are gentle beginnings of remembrance. She left behind no children of her own, but she left behind thousands who call her teacher, mother, mentor, and muse. And maybe that's what immortality truly is, to plant something in others that keeps growing long after you're gone. Lee Joo-Sil's legacy is not only etched in Korea's cinematic history, but in the hearts of those who believe that authenticity never ages. She lived as a performer, but she departed as poetry. Her story will continue to echo wherever art seeks to tell the truth. And perhaps, in some quiet corner of Seoul tonight, someone is rewatching one of her scenes, the kind where she doesn't speak but still says everything. Maybe they're crying without realizing why. Maybe they're smiling through their tears. Because that's what her presence did. It reached beyond the screen and touched something fragile and human within us all. Her light may have dimmed, but her warmth remains. To Lee Joo-Sil, thank you for teaching us that beauty doesn't fade, it transforms. Thank you for proving that silence can roar louder than applause. And thank you for reminding us that every story worth telling comes from the heart. Rest well, beautiful soul. You gave us stories to remember and emotions that will never die. And to everyone reading or watching this, if you, too, believe that her legacy deserves to live on, join us. Let's keep her memory alive through the stories we tell, the emotions we share, and the love we continue to give. Crescent Moon subscribe to Midnight in Seoul, where we honor the stars who shaped Korean cinema and celebrate the souls behind the screen. Together, let's keep the light of Lee Joo-Sil shining, not just as a memory, but as a promise that true art never dies. Let's remember the souls who shaped K-drama history, together.